When a ruthless mafia boss suspects his glamorous fiancée of betrayal, he orchestrates the ultimate loyalty test, faking his own irreversible coma. He expects to catch her red-handed. What he doesn't expect is his quiet, unassuming maid doing the one unthinkable thing that will completely rewrite his criminal empire. Vincent Moretti was not a man who believed in coincidences. At 34, he was the undisputed architect of the most lucrative underground syndicate on the eastern seaboard. From the shadowed shipping containers at the port of Newark to the glittering real estate developments in Manhattan's Hudson Yards. Vincent's word was absolute law. He was a phantom to the FBI and a god to his subordinates. But absolute power breeds absolute paranoia, and lately the cold prickle of betrayal had begun to crawl up the back of his neck. The source of his unease was sitting across from him in the dimly lit dining room of his Oyster Bay estate, his fiancée Victoria Kensington. Victoria was a vision of old money aristocracy. With her sharp jawline, icy blue eyes, and an inherited pedigree that masked her family's quiet bankruptcy, she was the perfect legitimate shield for Vincent's illicit empire. Their engagement, sealed with a flawless 12-carat Graf diamond, was a transaction. He provided the unlimited wealth her family desperately needed to maintain their Fifth Avenue facade. She provided the high society connections that allowed his laundered money to flow cleanly through hedge funds. But over the past month, Vincent had noticed the subtle cracks in the porcelain, discrepancies in his offshore Cayman accounts, burner phones discarded in the guest wing, whispered conversations that abruptly ended the moment he entered a room. Vincent needed to know the truth, but confronting a liar only breeds better lies. He needed her guard entirely down. He needed to be dead, or at least close enough to it. The plan was executed with terrifying precision on a rain-slicked stretch of the FDR Drive. Vincent's armored Maybach was deliberately T-boned by a stolen commercial box truck. The metallic crunch echoed over the East River as the Maybach was violently spun into the concrete barriers. But inside, Vincent was perfectly safe, secured by a custom 5-point harness and a reinforced titanium roll cage. He was pulled from the wreckage covered in theatrical blood and immediately rushed not to Mount Sinai, but to the private subterranean medical wing of his own Long Island compound. Dr. Arthur Pendleton, a brilliant neurosurgeon who had been on the Moretti payroll for over a decade, was waiting. Within hours, the narrative was spun and fed to the syndicate, the press, and most importantly, to Victoria. Vincent Moretti had suffered catastrophic cerebral trauma. He was in a deep, irreversible coma, lying in the sterile white bed, surrounded by the rhythmic, mechanical hiss of a ventilator and the steady beep of an electrocardiogram. Vincent was entirely awake. Dr. Pendleton had administered a highly specialized, localized paralytic, a derivative of curare used in deep cover intelligence operations. It left Vincent's voluntary muscles locked and his eyes half closed and unblinking, while his mind remained razor sharp. The medical monitors were rigged. The telemetry displaying failing brainwaves was a pre-recorded loop running on Pendleton's secure tablet. Vincent was a prisoner in his own flesh, but he was also the ultimate spy. The heavy mahogany door to the medical suite clicked open. The scent of Tom Ford's Tuscan leather mixed with expensive vanilla drifted into the room. It was Victoria. Vincent's heart rate would have spiked if the beta blockers in his IV weren't artificially suppressing his pulse. He waited for the tears. He waited for the desperate pleas for him to wake up. He waited for the woman he was supposed to marry to show a singular ounce of humanity. Instead, he heard the sharp click of her stiletto heels pacing the hardwood floor. "Is the feed to the security cameras cut?" Victoria's voice was completely devoid of emotion. It was as cold as the November rain lashing against the windows. "Yes, Miss Kensington," a deeper male voice replied. Vincent recognized that voice instantly, and an invisible knife twisted in his gut. It was Leo Romano. Leo was his underboss, his right-hand man, the man who had bled for the Moretti family for 15 years. "Good," Victoria said. A rustling sound followed. Vincent felt a sharp tug on his left wrist. Victoria was forcibly unbuckling his Patek Philippe Nautilus watch. She yanked it free, the metal scraping against his skin. "Call Thomas at Kirkland & Ellis. Tell the trust attorneys we need to initiate the contingency protocols immediately. I want his liquid assets frozen and transferred to the holding company before the rest of the captains figure out he's essentially a vegetable." "Are you sure about this, Vic?" Leo asked, his voice dripping with an intimacy that made Vincent's blood run cold. "If Pendleton manages to bring him back—" "Look at him, Leo," she scoffed, stepping closer. She tapped a perfectly manicured nail against Vincent's cheek. The physical contact sent a jolt of helpless rage through him. "There's nobody home. He's a ghost. The king is dead." She leaned in, her lips brushing against Leo's. Vincent listened to the sickening sound of his fiancée kissing his underboss mere inches from his face. The trap had worked flawlessly, but the reality of the betrayal was a venom he hadn't fully prepared for. They weren't just stealing his money. They had orchestrated this behind his back for months. He realized with a chilling clarity that the accident on the FDR might not have been just his own staging. They might have been planning their own hit on him, and his theatrical crash merely beat them to the punch. "We move on the Jersey ports tomorrow," Leo murmured against her lips. "Once the capos accept that I'm acting boss, we phase out the loyalists. But we can't wait forever. In a week, we make sure his oxygen supply has a tragic brief malfunction." Vincent lay trapped in the silence of his own paralyzed body, listening to his death sentence being signed. He had the information he needed, but he was physically incapable of signaling Dr. Pendleton to end the charade. He was surrounded by enemies in his own home. He was drowning in the dark, until the door handle clicked again. "Excuse me. I need to change the IV fluids." The voice was soft, trembling slightly, but laced with a quiet determination. It belonged to Hazel Miller. Hazel was 24, a former nursing student who had been forced to drop out when her father accrued a massive, insurmountable gambling debt to a rival crew in Brooklyn. To protect her family, she had accepted a position on the domestic staff of the Moretti estate, effectively working as an indentured servant to pay off the debt. She was invisible to people like Victoria and Leo. She wore a simple grey uniform, kept her head down, and moved like a shadow through the grand halls of the mansion. "Make it quick, mouse," Leo snapped, annoyed by the interruption. He stepped away from Victoria, adjusting the cuffs of his bespoke suit. "And keep your mouth shut about us being in here. The boss needs his rest." "Of course, Mr. Romano," Hazel whispered, keeping her eyes glued to the floor tiles. Victoria let out a disdainful sigh, clutching Vincent's stolen Patek Philippe in her palm, and swept out of the room with Leo close behind. The heavy door clicked shut, leaving Hazel alone with the comatose Mafia boss. Vincent felt the shift in the room's atmosphere. Hazel approached his bedside. Her movements were gentle, completely lacking the rough clinical detachment of the estate's hired nurses. She checked the IV line, replaced the saline bag, and then took a warm, damp cloth from a basin. Carefully, she began to wipe the cold sweat from Vincent's forehead. "I'm sorry, Mr. Moretti," Hazel murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm so sorry about the things they say to you. I know you can't hear me, but no one deserves to be treated like a piece of meat." Vincent wanted to scream. He wanted to tell her to find Dr. Pendleton to give him the reversal agent, but he could do nothing but stare blankly at the ceiling. Over the next 3 days, a bizarre routine developed. Victoria and Leo would visit twice a day, using Vincent's room as their private war room. They discussed hostile takeovers, the bribery of Port Authority officials, and the systematic dismantling of Vincent's inner circle. They spoke freely, assuming the man in the bed was a hollow shell. But Hazel was different. When she came in for the night shift, she treated him with profound dignity. She would massage his hands to prevent his joints from stiffening. She would read the financial sections of the Wall Street Journal aloud to him, claiming that a man of his intellect shouldn't be left in silence. On the 4th night, the psychological torment reached its peak. Leo entered the room alone well past midnight. He locked the door behind him. Vincent could hear the heavy thud of the deadbolt sliding into place. "Time's up, boss," Leo whispered, walking over to the stainless steel medical cart. "Pendleton is starting to talk about brainwave activity. Vic is getting nervous. It's better for everyone if you just slip away tonight." Vincent felt a surge of pure, unadulterated panic. His paralyzed muscles strained against the chemical chains, but nothing moved. He heard the sharp snap of a glass vial breaking. Leo was drawing something into a syringe. Potassium chloride, likely. A lethal dose that would stop his heart and look entirely like a natural cardiac arrest on the rigged monitors. Leo stepped up to the IV line, the needle glinting in the dim light of the telemetry screens. Suddenly, the ensuite bathroom door flung open. Hazel, who had been quietly restocking the linen closet inside, stumbled out. She had heard everything. Leo froze his eyes widening as he stared at the young maid. The syringe hovered inches from Vincent's IV port. "What the hell are you doing in here?" Leo snarled his hand, dropping to the holster concealed under his jacket. Most people would have run. Most people would have screamed or begged for their lives, understanding that witnessing a mafia assassination was an instant death sentence. Hazel did the unthinkable. She didn't retreat. Instead, she lunged forward with a clumsy, panicked shriek, throwing her entire body weight against the stainless steel medical cart. The cart violently crashed into Leo's legs. Taken off guard, Leo stumbled backward. The syringe flew from his hand, shattering against the far wall and spilling the lethal potassium chloride across the imported rug. "You stupid bitch!" Leo roared, backhanding Hazel across the face with terrifying force. Hazel collapsed to the floor, her lip split and bleeding. But as she fell, her hand instinctively grabbed the emergency call button tethered to the bed rail, ripping it from its socket and triggering a massive blaring alarm throughout the entire medical wing. Footsteps echoed down the hallway immediately. Security guards loyal to the estate began pounding on the locked door. "Mr. Romano, open the door." Leo looked frantically from the shattered syringe to the bleeding maid on the floor. He couldn't kill her now. There were too many witnesses outside. He straightened his jacket, his chest heaving, and pointed a trembling finger at Hazel. "You clumsily knocked over my medication, you idiot. You're fired. Get out of my sight." Leo unlocked the door and shoved past the guards, disappearing into the mansion to salvage his alibi. The guards helped Hazel up, assuming it was just a domestic dispute, and left her alone to clean the mess. Once the room was silent again, save for the rhythmic breathing of the ventilator, Hazel locked the door. She wiped the blood from her chin, her hands shaking violently. She slowly walked back over to Vincent's bed. She looked at the smashed vial on the floor, then at the complex medical monitors. Hazel leaned in, incredibly close to Vincent's ear. Her breath was warm against his skin. "I used to study anesthesiology before I dropped out, Mr. Moretti," she whispered, her voice trembling but sharp. "When a man is brain dead, his pupils don't dilate when he hears his fiancée kissing another man. And a brain-dead man doesn't sweat when a needle is pointed at his arm." Vincent's mind raced. She knows. Hazel gently placed her small, trembling hand over Vincent's paralyzed one. "I know Dr. Pendleton is looping the monitor feed. I know you're in there. I know you're awake." She leaned closer, her eyes scanning his locked, unblinking face. "If you can hear me, if you want me to help you take them down, squeeze my hand. Just once." Vincent summoned every ounce of willpower he possessed. He focused all his raging, burning energy into his right hand, fighting against the heavy blanket of the chemical paralytic. Slowly, agonizingly, his index finger twitched. And then, with a definitive surge of strength, he squeezed her fingers. Hazel gasped, tears springing to her eyes. The Maid and the Mafiaboss had just formed the most dangerous alliance in the criminal underworld. The single deliberate squeeze of Vincent's hand was the catalyst that shifted the power dynamic of the entire East Coast underworld. Inside that sterile subterranean medical suite, a 24-year-old maid holding a crumpled rag became the most critical asset in the Moretti crime family. Hazel's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She kept her hand over his, her eyes darting toward the locked mahogany door. "Okay," she breathed, her voice barely a tremor. "Okay. 1 squeeze for yes, 2 for no. Do you understand? 1 squeeze. Dr. Pendleton is in on it. He's keeping you paralyzed for them. 1 squeeze." Hazel swallowed hard, her medical training taking over. If they are using a paralytic derivative without intubation, they are suppressing your nervous system just enough to mimic a vegetative state without stopping your autonomic breathing. It's brilliant, but it's reversible. I just need to know who to trust on the outside. We have to contact someone loyal to you. Can you spell a name squeeze when I hit the right letter? Vincent lay motionless, his mind a raging inferno of calculated vengeance as Hazel began to slowly recite the alphabet. A, B, C, D. Squeeze. It took 20 agonizing minutes of spelling. Dominic, Dominic Russo. He was Vincent's head of security, a ruthless former ranger who possessed an unwavering, almost fanatical loyalty to the Moretti bloodline. Leo had conveniently reassigned Dominic to oversee the syndicate's casino operations in Atlantic City the day after the crash, effectively removing the only man who would have demanded a second medical opinion. "Dominic," Hazel confirmed, wiping a bead of sweat from her own forehead. "I know him, but Leo confiscated your phones, and the house landlines are monitored by his guys. How do I reach him?" Vincent couldn't answer. He could only wait. The opportunity presented itself the following afternoon. Victoria swept into the medical wing, reeking of expensive gin and arrogant victory. She tossed her Chanel handbag onto the leather armchair and pulled out a sleek, untraceable burner phone, one of the devices she used to coordinate the hostile takeover of the shipping ports. Leo wants the transfer deeds finalized by 5. Victoria snapped into the receiver, pacing in front of Vincent's bed, entirely oblivious to the fact that her fiancé was silently logging every word. I don't care if the Port Authority pushes back, double the bribe. Once Vincent officially expires tomorrow night, the captains need to see that Leo already has the keys to the kingdom. She ended the call, tossing the burner phone onto the stainless steel tray next to Vincent's IV drip. She then walked into the ensuite bathroom to reapply her lipstick, leaving the door ajar. Hazel, who had been quietly sweeping the hallway, saw her chance. She slipped into the room, her rubber-soled shoes making no sound. With trembling fingers, she grabbed the burner phone. She opened the messaging app, typed a number she had memorized from the estate's emergency contact ledger, and wrote a single line of text. It was a phrase she had extracted from Vincent through their grueling alphabet system the night before. The king is blind, but he is listening. The winter is cold. It was an old contingency code Vincent and Dominic had established years ago. Hazel hit send, deleted the message from the outbox, and placed the phone back on the tray with millimeter precision just as the bathroom faucet shut off. By midnight, the atmosphere in the compound shifted. Leo walked into the medical suite, the dark circles under his eyes betraying his paranoia. The port takeover was hitting snags. Some of the older traditional captains were demanding to see Vincent before they pledged allegiance to a new boss. "We're out of time," Leo muttered to Victoria, who was lounging on the sofa scrolling through real estate listings in Monaco. Dominic Russo just went dark in Atlantic City. He's not answering his check-ins. If he suspects something and rallies the loyalists, we have a civil war on our hands. Victoria looked up, her icy eyes narrowing. Then we don't wait for the poison. Do it tomorrow afternoon. Smother him. Pendleton will write it up as acute respiratory failure. We cremate the body by Friday. End of story. Leo looked at Vincent's still form. A cruel, triumphant smile crept onto his face. Tomorrow at 3 p.m., the reign of Vincent Moretti ends. They left the room, leaving Hazel hiding in the shadows of the linen closet, clutching a stolen keycard. The deadline was set. It was time to wake the dead. At 1 p.m. the next day, the medical suite door opened. Dr. Arthur Pendleton walked in carrying his tablet and a fresh AV bag. He looked exhausted, the weight of his treason heavy on his hunched shoulders. Before he could reach the bed, Hazel stepped out from behind the privacy screen. In her right hand, she held a heavy, silenced Beretta 9mm, a weapon Dominic Russo had quietly smuggled to her through the kitchen's delivery entrance an hour prior. Dr. Pendleton froze the tablet, slipping from his hands and clattering onto the hardwood floor. "Lock the door, doctor." Hazel ordered, her voice devoid of its usual meekness. The gun did not waver. "And disable the security feed." Pendleton's face drained of color. "Listen to me, girl. You don't know what you're doing. Leo will kill us both." "Leo is dead meat," a low, gravelly voice echoed from the corner of the room. Dominic Russo stepped out of the adjoining bathroom, a tactical shotgun resting casually against his shoulder. He had bypassed the estate's perimeter security with the ease of a ghost. The only question, Doc, is whether you join him. Now reverse the paralytic. Give the boss the antidote. Pendleton, sweating profusely, scrambled to his medical cart. If I push the Shugamadex too fast, the shock to his nervous system could trigger a genuine cardiac arrest. He's been chemically locked for days. Do it. Dominic growled, racking the shotgun. Hazel moved to Vincent's side. She watched as Pendleton's hands, shaking violently, injected a clear vial of the reversal agent directly into Vincent's central line. The reaction was immediate and terrifying. Vincent's body, dormant for nearly a week, suddenly seized. His back arched off the mattress as his muscles spasmed wildly. The monitors screamed warning of catastrophic tachycardia. Vincent's mouth opened in a silent scream of agony as liquid fire tore through his veins, his nerve endings waking up all at once. "Hold him down," Pendleton yelled, but Dominic shoved the doctor aside. Hazel grabbed Vincent's hand. "Breathe, Mr. Moretti," she urged. "Fight it. You have to fight it." Slowly, agonizingly, the violent convulsions subsided. The harsh, erratic beeping of the heart monitor leveled out into a steady, furious rhythm. Vincent Moretti's eyes snapped open. They were no longer half-lidded and vacant. They were dark, entirely lucid, and burning with a predatory rage. He ripped the nasal cannula from his face, his chest heaving as he drew his first unassisted breath in a week. Every muscle in his body screamed with lactic acid and stiffness, but adrenaline was a potent painkiller. "Dominic!" Vincent rasped, his voice raw and harsh from disuse. "Here, boss," Dominic said, stepping to the foot of the bed. "The perimeter is secured. The loyal capos are holding the perimeter of the estate. Leo's men are isolated in the south wing." Vincent slowly swung his legs over the side of the bed. Hazel rushed to support him, but he held up a hand. He needed to stand on his own. With a grimace, his feet hit the cold floor. He was weaker than he wanted to be, but he was alive. He looked down at the terrified Dr. Pendleton, who was cowering against the wall. "Doc," Vincent whispered, his tone chillingly calm. "You're going to sit in that chair, and you're going to keep running the fake monitor loop on your tablet. When Leo and my beautiful fiancée walk in here to kill me, you will act exactly as planned." At 2:55 p.m., Dominic and Hazel concealed themselves inside the walk-in closet, leaving the door cracked just enough to see the bed. Vincent climbed back under the sheets, assuming his previous paralyzed posture. He slowed his breathing. He waited. At precisely 3 p.m., the heavy mahogany door clicked open. Leo and Victoria walked in. Victoria was wearing a stunning black morning dress, designer, of course. She was already dressing for the funeral she was about to orchestrate. "Is it done?" Leo asked Pendleton, glancing at the monitors. Pendleton, a gun pressed to his spine through the closet wall by Dominic, nodded jerkily. His vitals are suppressed. It will look entirely natural." Leo stepped up to the bed. He looked down at Vincent, a sneer twisting his features. "You were a good earner, Vince, but you got soft. You stopped seeing the knives in the dark." Leo reached out and picked up the heavy memory foam pillow from the adjacent armchair. "Make it quick, Leo," Victoria said coldly, turning her back to the bed to check her reflection in the mirror. "I have a meeting with the trust attorneys at 4 to finalize the asset transfer." Leo raised the pillow, preparing to force it down over Vincent's face, but the pillow never made contact. With the sudden explosive speed of a striking viper, Vincent's hand shot up from beneath the blankets. his grip fueled by a week of pure, unadulterated rage, clamped around Leo's throat like a steel vice. Leo gasped, his eyes bulging in absolute horror as the pillow dropped from his hands. He tried to pull away, but Vincent dragged him downward, forcing Leo to look directly into the eyes of the man he thought was a vegetable. "You're right, Leo," Vincent whispered, his voice dripping with venom. "I did stop seeing the knives, so I decided to play dead, to see who would hold them." Victoria spun around at the sound of the struggle. The color instantly vanished from her perfect face. She let out a blood-curdling shriek as she saw Vincent, the man she had betrayed, the man whose empire she had stolen, sitting upright, crushing her lover's windpipe. She turned to run, but the closet door slammed open. Dominic Russo stepped out, his shotgun aimed squarely at Victoria's chest. Hazel stepped out behind him, her eyes cold and unforgiving. "Sit down, Victoria," Dominic commanded. Victoria collapsed into the armchair, her hands trembling violently. Vincent, please," she stammered, tears ruining her perfect makeup. "He forced me. Leo threatened me." Vincent released his grip just enough to let Leo suck in a ragged, pathetic breath. With a violent shove, Vincent threw his underboss to the floor. Leo scrambled backward, clutching his throat, coughing up blood. Vincent slowly stood up from the bed. He didn't look like a dying man. He looked like the devil himself. He walked over to Victoria, looking down at her with absolute disgust. "You thought you were stealing my money?" Vincent asked softly. "While you two were whispering your little plans next to my bed, I had my financial team execute a dead man's switch. The Cayman accounts, the hedge funds, the real estate. It was all transferred into a blind trust 3 days ago. Your family is bankrupt, Victoria. You have nothing." Victoria sobbed, burying her face in her hands. Vincent turned to Dominic. "Take Leo to the port. The boys in the shipping containers need a reminder of what happens to traitors. Make sure he understands the concept of a real, irreversible end." "With pleasure, boss," Dominic said, grabbing the terrified Leo by the collar and dragging him out of the room. Vincent looked back at Victoria. "And her," he mused. "Strip her of her jewelry, confiscate her phones, throw her out the front gates with nothing but the clothes on her back. Let high society see exactly what she is." As the guards hauled a screaming Victoria away, the medical suite finally fell silent. Vincent turned to look at Hazel, the quiet, unassuming maid who had risked everything standing amongst the wreckage of his former life. Vincent walked toward her, his expression softening for the first time in months. "Your father's debt to the Brooklyn crew is paid in full," Vincent said, his tone carrying the absolute weight of his power. "And there's a trust fund set up in your name, enough to pay for your medical school anywhere you want to go. You saved my life, Hazel. The Moretti family does not forget." Hazel looked up at him, a small, genuine smile breaking through her exhaustion. "I think you saved yourself, Mr. Moretti. I just gave you the signal. The king had returned not from the dead, but from the shadows, and his empire would never be the same." What a wild ride. From a paralyzed prisoner to reclaiming his throne, Vincent proved why he's the undisputed boss, and Hazel proved that true loyalty comes from the most unexpected places. If you loved the intense twists, the psychological warfare, and that explosive revenge finale, smash that like button, share this video with fellow drama lovers, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more crazy storytelling.